Let's just write it a bit bigger and lower then. Wait, did I have one guess? No, I didn't. Today we're talking about truth is just a better lie. See, most people would hear that and think that's absurd. They'd immediately disagree, as they should, and that's good. Because if someone lies to you, then the consequences are obviously real. Trust breaks, relationship break. Entire lives can be changed or destroyed off of one lie. So before we continue, I just want to make one thing clear, very clear. I'm not defending lies, I'm simply questioning truth. Not whether truth exists, whether consciousness is capable of holding it, because those are two very different questions. Most people assume that because they know something, they possess truth. Well, what if knowing and truth are not the same thing? What if knowing is merely consciousness attempting to interpret something far larger than itself? Most people think lies are the problem. I've never been fully convinced because a lie cannot create itself. It has to borrow, it has to pull from something. A lie requires truth. It bends it, twists it, rearranges it, distorts it, but it cannot exist independently. Without truth, there is nothing to manipulate, nothing to imitate, nothing to wear, which makes me wonder, if lies depend on truth in order to exist, how much distortions is required before truth becomes a lie? And more importantly, who gets to decide? This is usually where people think I'm talking about ego. I'm not, at least not directly. Although I've never been particularly interested in destroying the ego, I've always been more interested in understanding its layers and why it exists. But that's for another conversation. What I'm talking about is consciousness itself, because consciousness seems to do something very similar to a lie. Not intentionally, naturally. The moment consciousness encounters reality, it interprets it, it names it, categorize it, structure it, create meaning around it. It doesn't encounter truth directly. It encounters its understanding of truth, which means the moment truth enters consciousness, it acquires shape. And the moment it acquires shape, something has already been lost. Not because consciousness failed, but because interpretation is reduction. A map is not the territory, a word is not the thing, a description is not the experience. And perhaps a truth understood is already different from the truth itself. This is why certainty fascinates me, not knowledge, certainty. Because certainty often appears right before questioning ends. The moment consciousness says, I know, the search slows down, the curiosity softens, the mystery begins shrinking. And perhaps that's necessary because no one can function while questioning everything. But what if certainty carries a hidden cost? Because if truth itself remains larger than our understanding of it, then every certainty becomes a structure built around something fundamentally unknown. Not wrong, not false, incomplete. And maybe that's why, or that's where lies become dangerous. Not because they're false, because they mimic certainty. But then another uncomfortable realization appear. Truth can do the same thing. Truth can become so certain that questioning stops. And the moment questioning stops, growth often follows. And one thing you'd realize within these recordings or these conversations of mine is that I never leave the subconscious in the background because consciousness already receives enough attention. Consciousness gets all the spotlight, the recognition, the awakening, the praise. Meanwhile, the subconscious remains mostly invisible. And maybe that's because it has no interest in proving itself, no interest in possessing truth, no interest in owning knowledge because it simply is. Which makes me wonder if the deepest truth are not from the ones consciousness understands, but the one it recognizes, the one it feels before it can explain, the one it listens to before it can describe. Because the deeper I look, the less interested I become in collecting truth. And the more interested I become in understanding the very thing that keeps turning them into certainties. Maybe truth was never the problem. Maybe lies were never the problem either. Maybe the problem begins the moment consciousness mistakes its interpretation for the thing itself. Because a lie bends truth intentionally, but consciousness bends truth simply by trying to understand it. And if lies imitate truth, and consciousness can only imitate its understanding of truth, then perhaps the most uncomfortable question isn't whether we recognize a lie. Perhaps the phrase, "it was all a lie," was the closest consciousness ever came to telling the truth. Not merely recognizing deception, but a realization of its own limits.